Hi, Mom.
Ready?
Hey!
Well, guys, it is great to see you. And today we're going to be wrapping up this big series or this fun series that we've been in called Better, where we've been talking about how can 2020 be a better year than 2019. And what we've talked about throughout this series is I've said, I believe it's possible. I mean, I really believe it's possible for you and possible for me to have a better year than last year. But it's going to require some things from us. And we've been talking about that over the last couple weeks. So if you haven't been here, I really want to encourage you to go to MP Austin, and you can watch, you can listen to, you can actually download some questions that take what we're talking about on Sunday even further and deeper, or you can download our North Point app and get the same kind of access and catch up on what we said. Now, today is, before I kind of jump in and we wrap this whole thing up, I really want to update you on two very specific things. So the first thing I want to update you on is what's taking place next weekend. So next weekend is Super Bowl weekend. Super Bowl Sunday's happening, which I'm excited about. Any Chief fans in the room? Any? Okay. Couple representatives, Texas Tech fans, so you're Mahomes. Yeah, any 49ers fan, you can't be in. Really unbelievable. That is awesome. You represented well. You just need to know that. Anyway, so Super Bowl weekend's going to be next weekend. It's going to be a great weekend. Hopefully you've got some fun plans. But in addition to that, we have got a Super Bowl kind of series that we are kicking off called Love Dates and Heartbreaks. And guys, I'm so excited for this, because this is going to be a perfect series for those of you who are single and you're dating or you hope to date, or for those of you who are parents and you've got children who are dating or hope to date. This is going to be a great series for those of you who are married and you just want to discover, how can I go deeper in my relationship? How can I experience more intimacy when it comes to my marriage? This is going to be a great series for that. And this is going to be a great series for those of you who said, you know what, I was married, but now I'm single. And this whole single dating world has completely changed. So in essence, if I could summarize it, this whole series is going to be perfect for those of you in a romantic relationship or you desire to be in a romantic relationship. Because the thing I think we all know is when it comes to love, dates, heartbreaks, marriage, intimacy, the whole thing, it's complicated. It's difficult. And so starting next week, we're going to do everything we possibly can to begin to uncomplicate it. So I want to remind you or update you on what's taking place next week. The other thing I want to update you guys on is what I shared last week. So I shared something with you last week that many of you sent me a text or you sent me emails and you encouraged me and it was awesome. Like, you guys are so supportive. And so for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, last week I shared with you that my number one thing I'm trying to do in 2020 to make this year a better year than last year is improve my physical health. And I just think one of the greatest gifts I can give my family, give you guys, is the healthiest version of me. And so I was telling my buddy about this, and he looked at me and he said, well, Buck, if you're serious, then I want to make a bet with you. And the bet I want to make with you is I'll give you 2 months, on March 22nd, is kind of the deadline. I'll give you 2 months to lose 20 pounds. And if you don't, I get to shave your head. And I thought, that's pretty risky and all that. But I thought that's a great incentive, good motivator. So I shook his hand and I said, you're on. So I got, 2 months to do this. So with that said, I wanted to give you guys an update because there seems to be some curiosity about this. So the update title is called #SaveBucksHair. And somebody who actually emailed me used that at the end of their email. They were like, Buck, I really want to save your hair, #SaveBucksHair. So anyways, here's where I'm at up to date. So I'm sticking to a diet and workout program. So far, so good on that. I've lost 4 pounds, which means I got 16 to go. That's about 2. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So I feel pretty good. I'm like, okay, I'm sticking to it, all that kind of stuff. But I got to tell you, this is risky. It's a really risky thing for me. And the honest truth is why it's so risky is because I've tried to lose 20 pounds for 20 years. And I've never done it. Never. I've failed every single year. But here's the deal. As I kind of was thinking about this and just kind of pulled back and just thought about, what's been going on? Why I've not been successful over the last 20 years. Here's what I've discovered, just observation-wise. Over the last 20 years, I have had plenty of conviction when it comes to my personal health. And conviction is that thing, that internal kind of like belief system, like, here's what I believe, right? I mean, I've read all kinds of blogs. I've listened to podcasts. I've watched, documentaries on health and what kind of foods and what you shouldn't and the benefits and all this stuff. I've watched my father, who's really struggled with his physical health, not be able to take care of my mom when he really needed to take care of her physically, and he really struggled with that. And I remember internally just going, I never want that to happen. I'm committed to this. I'm convicted. I've got these deep convictions. I've got to get healthy. That's been true every single year. In addition to that, I've had plenty of commitment. Like, I've gotten up at 4 in the morning or 4:30 and gone to the gym and, watching what I eat, and I'm committed to that and, that whole thing. So I've got a lot of conviction and a lot of commitment. But the tension, and the thing I was thinking about this week, the tension that's held me back is what I would call the pull. The pull. And to explain what I mean by that, here's what I've experienced. Is kind of this little workout device, this little band here. What I've experienced is that, I've got all this conviction and commitment. And man, I'm committed to do this and I'm convicted to do this. And I'll hang for a week, or maybe I'll go for 2 weeks. And as I'm going for 2 weeks, in the midst of that, with diet and exercise and the whole thing, I feel this pull. And the pull just kind of sounds like, hey, it's no big deal. You don't need to work out this morning. The pull kind of sounds like, hey, rest is more important than exercise. You need a clear brain, and so, you got to get rest. Or the pull says, hey, you've been good for 3 or 4 days. Just give in this one time. It's no big deal. But then I kind of lean into my convictions, and I lean into my commitments, and I say no, and I'll go maybe another week or another month. And man, I'm out here, and I'm feeling good. But it's so interesting to me that oftentimes the further I go, man, I feel this pull. And so far, what's happened to me over and over and over, the pull ends up pulling me back. And it pulls me back into routines I have no business being in. It pulls me back into habits that I had all this conviction and commitment around. It pulls me back to at 10 o'clock at night just to think about brownies and Bluebell ice cream. Because it's so delicious. In fact, speaking of brownies, the guy I made a bet with, or who made a bet with me, he knows I love brownies. And 2 days into the bet, I get a knock at my door at 8 o'clock at night. And I'm like, what's going on? So I open the door, and I see a Tiff Treats delivery guy. And I'm like, what is this? This is kind of awkward, And then the guy goes, this is a delivery for Buck. And he didn't hand me like a wee little bag. No, it was a giant bag of Tiff Treats. And I bring it in, I set it on the table, and Jill and I and the boys are looking at it, and I open the card, and it says, enjoy these low-carb snacks from your hairstylist. And the whole bag was full of the best brownies you could ever imagine, and Bluebell ice cream, little pint-sized stuff. It was awesome. So I texted him, and I'm like, I'm not giving in, this kind of thing. But the point is this. What I've discovered is, man, I've had a lot of conviction, and I've had a lot of commitment. But this pull is so present, and it's pulled me back to getting habits. It's pulled me back to getting those routines that ultimately hold me back from where I want to be. And I share that with you because my guess is you've experienced the same thing. My guess, maybe it's for you, it's relationally, maybe in your marriage, maybe with your son or daughter, maybe when it comes to God and you want to get closer to God, maybe when it comes to a habit, maybe like me, you're trying to get healthy, physically healthy, whatever it may be, and you're committed and you've got these convictions, these beliefs, and you're going, I'm in. And you get a week into it, you get a month into it, maybe you get a couple months into it, but you feel this, and you feel it just kind of lean in and say, hey, is it a big deal? It's no big deal. It's no big. Hey, just this one time. Hey, you know what? It's her fault. It's not your fault. You know what? It's his fault. Just give in. And this pull just kind of pulls you back to places and to habits and to things that honestly just hold you back. And I think what we all know, I think if we're just speaking really honestly, I think all of us know, at the end of the day, convictions, commitments, they're part of it. That is part of it. But they're simply not enough. They're not enough, because if they were enough, I'd be incredibly skinny, and I wouldn't have this conversation with you. If they were enough, all of our physical health would be great. Our marriages, man, they would be fantastic, and we would really experience what God intends us to experience. If they were enough, I think when it comes to habits and addictions, we would experience incredible freedom. When it comes to our finances, we would feel what it feels like to be free from our if it were enough, we would experience that. But the reality is, I think all of us would raise our hand as we think about this a little bit deeper. I think we'd all go, yeah, that's part of it. But it's not enough. There's got to be something else. And today what I want to do is I want to talk about that something else, because I do believe there's something else. And if we're willing to take a step into this something else, it's really one of the key ingredients that leads to freedom. It leads to experiencing freedom in your marriage, freedom in your life, freedom to be who God designed you to be. And freedom to experience things perhaps relationally with your son or daughter, or to experience freedom from habits and addictions that you've never been able to overcome. This something else is so important and so powerful that actually allows us to get to something better. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. Now, here's the thing that's really cool. Is when you open these ancient manuscripts, that's really what the Bible is. It's just 66 ancient letters, ancient documents that are conveniently put together in what we call the Bible. When you open these ancient letters and you begin to read these ancient letters, what's so cool is it leans in and it gives us insight into what this something else is. In fact, the ancient letter I want us to look at today is called Hebrews. And the reason why it's called Hebrews is because it was written specifically to Hebrews, to first century Jewish individuals. And these Jewish individuals, they had tons of conviction and tons of commitment around Jesus Christ. They were convicted. Jesus is the unique Son of God. That's who he is. I believe that, right? And they had commitments to begin to wrap their life around Jesus Christ and around what he called us to do, to become followers of Jesus Christ or perhaps disciples. And so this is happening. But in the midst of their conviction, in the midst of their commitment, they were feeling a ton of the pull. And it was pulling them back. And their experience is that to be a Christian in the first century, for these Hebrews, man, it came at a cost. It wasn't like today, hey, you can make a decision or not, put your trust in or not, right? Back then, if you put your trust in, it could cost you your career, it could cost you your home, it could cost you your kids, it could cost you your family, it could cost you your life. And so they were experiencing this kind of persecution and this hardship, and it was pulling them back. And so the author goes, hey, I see the conviction, and I see the commitment, but there is something else that we need to talk about. And so what is that? Well, the author tells us, and this is the way he tells us. He says, see to it, brothers and sisters, so talking about one another, talking about a community, talking about a group, see to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. In essence, here's what he's saying. He's just saying, hey, you all need to know that every single one of you are capable of having a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. And the minute you think you don't, the minute you think, no, I've got plenty of conviction and plenty of commitment, I would never do that in my life, is perhaps when you are most susceptible. The author says, guys, you just need to be aware of this. Every single one of you have the ability to have a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. Now, when it comes to sin, just a very simple definition of this is it just means missing the mark. Sin is missing the mark of choosing to be outside of God's design. In other words, God designed you, God designed me, God designed marriage, God designed relationships, God designed our kids, God designed morality, and he didn't design it to oppress us. I promise you that. The more that we lean into what God said, trust me, kiddo, with, we find liberation, we find freedom, we find the very things that our hearts desire the very most. But there's something in all of us that just kind of goes, I know what God said. I know what he said. I know what the design is, but I kind of want to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. I've missed the mark of God's design. That's sin. And the author says we're all susceptible to that. And that's kind of like this pull. This pull is like that sin. Hey, I'm trying to do a good thing. God, I'm trying to trust you with this area. But it feels like sin just kind of pulls me back. And when we give into this, eventually we get to a place where we turn our backs on God. And what's interesting is in this verse right here, where it says, turn away from the living God, this was originally written in Greek. And when you look at the Greek, it's an interesting how it's phrased, because it's not overnight, it's progressive. This is something that takes time. This is not something you wake up in the morning and go, hey, I'm just going to walk away from my commitments. I'm just going to walk away from my convictions. No, this is something that will take time, and it's day after day, week after week, month after month. And here's what I've seen that happens, is we end up misbehaving before we misbelieve. That we misbehave before we misbelieve. And here's how this works, is that we have these convictions and commitments. Like, God, I know I shouldn't do this in my marriage. I know I shouldn't talk to her this way. I know I shouldn't cross that line. I know I shouldn't do this with my kids. I know I shouldn't raise my voice or exasperate. I know I shouldn't do this morally. I know. And I've got these convictions and I've got commitments to say these are the very things that will end up hurting me and hurting those around me. But then we sin. Then we do what we want, when we want, with whom we want. And we miss the mark. And then what do we feel? What do you feel? Guilt. And we feel guilty, and we're like, oh man, I knew better, and gosh, I can see kind of the ripple effect of that. I shouldn't do this. And we feel guilt. And then we go back to our convictions and back to our commitments. Okay, I'm not going to do that again. I'm committed to not do that again. But then what happens? We sin again, and we sin again. And eventually, we have all this shame and guilt. And we don't like the shame and the guilt. And so we begin to change what we believe. Because if we can change what we believe, it makes us feel better. And now all of a sudden we go, I know God, but there's only like 2 verses on that. I know kind of God what you've said, but there's only like 6 verses or 10 verses, or, really it's cultural. It's just to their culture, not to our culture. And we begin to kind of go, did God really say? Did God really say? And we begin to change our belief systems so it makes us feel better. For example, lying. It's in the top 10 Commandments. It's a big deal. It ends up hurting you, the people around you. One of the things I say to my boys all the time, I say, hey, don't lie. Whatever you do, don't lie, because lying ends up hurting trust, and trust is the essence of a great relationship. It just diminishes that relationship. It hurts it. So don't lie. Well, we hear that, and then we lie around convictions and commitments. We feel guilty. And then we go, well, is lying really wrong? Is it really wrong to lie to the IRS? They got plenty of money. I'm just trying to support my family here. Is it really wrong to lie on my expense reports? Come on. The company is doing so well. Good Lord, I've got lots of needs here. Is it really wrong to lie to her or to him? This is consensual. It's for benefits right here. Is it really wrong to lie to them? It's benefiting me. Is it really wrong to lie to my wife, to my husband, to my kids? Because if I told them, it would be devastating. And now we begin to change our belief. And over time, regardless of your convictions and regardless of your commitments, we begin turning our back on the living God. And here's what we know. And if you've lived enough life, you know this, is that sin always has a gotcha. In fact, we talked about it a few weeks ago. That sin always has a gotcha. In other words, when we cross those lines and do those things, it may be a week, maybe a month, maybe a year, maybe a decade, but eventually it catches us. And typically, it just makes life far more complicated. It makes our relationships far more complicated. It makes almost, experiencing intimacy and marriage, the very thing we so desire. It's almost impossible to experience that. It makes our relationship with our son and daughter so hard because we can't truly be present with them because we've got so much stuff in here. And I want to be available for you, but I can't because of all this stuff in here, and it's complicated. And it causes us to be emotionless, to numb ourselves out. I got to numb, because I know what's going on in here, and I'm going to keep you at a distance. And then I feel lonely. Now we're struggling with loneliness. The point is, I think we all know that at the end of the day, sin has a gotcha, and the author of Hebrews says, guys, come on. We're all susceptible to this, regardless of how much conviction and how much commitment you have. We're all susceptible to turn our backs on the living God. So the question is, well, what do we do? Well, he tells us. He continues. And he says, but encourage one another daily, and then look at this phrase right here, as long as it's called today. Now that phrase, again, in the Greek, which is the original language, is so interesting. It literally means seize the day. As long as it's called today. If you have opportunity today, the author's saying, step into that opportunity. If it presents itself, for goodness sake, lean into that. Take a step into, and the question is what? What should we seize the opportunity for? Well, he tells us. He says, encourage one another daily. Encourage one another daily. That this is about one another's. This is about a community. This is about a group of individuals that you have engaged with, that you're doing enough life with. Like, hey, we're developing friendships and developing trust, and that takes time, and I get that. But there's some one another's in my life that I'm developing this with, and we get to a point of trust that we encourage one another. And the word encouragement, again, in the Greek, is such an interesting word. This means like this kind of, daily kind of stuff, like, the normal things of life. Like, hey, being a mom, moms, it's hard, isn't it? It's a tough thing to be a mom. You need people in your life going, hey, girl, here's what's going on. And sending you texts and encouraging you and being there to celebrate the good moments with your kids and to be with you and talk you off the ledge, when the hard moments of being a mom. And that's true when it comes to being a dad. That's true when it comes to your marriage. My goodness. There's so many things that make marriage complicated. That's true when it comes to dating relationships. We need that one another in our life. And it talks about daily. This is not one of those things, hey, once a month. Hey, once a year, a couple times a year, I go with this group and we just get real deep and we just have this good. No. That's completely missing the mark of what the author's saying. The author's saying this needs to be consistent, that you need some one another's in your life, that you have done enough life together, that you've built trust together that can say, hey, let me encourage you in the daily stuff. Hey, I know life's hard. Hey, send a text here and there. And can encourage you, and this is where the Greek word comes in. It's very interesting, in the big things of life. To say, hey, I saw the way you talked to your wife the other day. Do you think we could have coffee and talk about that? Hey, I heard what you said about your kids and what you keep referencing your kids to. Do you think we could have a conversation about that? Hey, I heard what you talked about, your habits and your goals and what you want. And I've hung out with you, on a weekly basis. And I'm seeing how you're just kind of crossing those lines. And the very thing you told me you want to do, you're not doing. Do you think we could grab a coffee and have that kind of conversation? The word encourage literally means to spur, to confront, to irritate to something better. And see, when you hear that level of encouragement, I think there's something in us that's like, oh, repulsive. Yuck. I don't want anybody irritating me, getting in my business. This is my life. You stay out of my life. I'm just fine all by myself. But perhaps we need the one another in our life to reflect some things to us. Because the author says, guys, I know it's irritating. I know. But if you want to get to the finish line, if you want to get to that place where it is better and you begin to experience that in life, conviction, part of it. Commitment, part of it. But you must be connected. Now, do you know who understands this whole concept? Any group in the United States of America or around the world that wants your life to get better, that wants you to overcome whatever it is. Any kind of group, for-profit, non-profit, that's trying to make you a better leader, that's trying to make you, better with your habits and addictions, they all get this concept. They completely understand it. And I could give you a lot of examples, but one I'll give you is AA. I've been part of AA. I've sat in a lot of meetings with AA, and I've encouraged a lot of people who've been part of AA. And I'm telling you, when I sit there in those meetings, I see this played out over and over and over, that the stories always go like this. Somebody introduces himself, and their story always has these parts. They go, you know what? I've got deep convictions. I know this is wrong. And I know it's tearing my family apart. It's tearing me apart. There's a cost to it. I'm deeply convicted. And I've made commitments. I've told my wife I'll never do it again. I've looked at my 8-year-old son's little eyes and I promised him, I said, I know it's hurting us and I won't take another drink. But then they're going, but I'm here. And I'm here because it's not enough. It's not enough. And everybody in that group looks at it, that individual and says, oh, me too. I know exactly what you're talking about, because it's not. Because we need the one another's. We need something beyond conviction and connection, or conviction and commitment. We need that connection. We need that sponsor. We need that person who's walking with us, encouraging one another daily if you're going to begin to break free. It's not only true in AA, it's true in your life. It's true in my life. It's true in our lives. The author wraps up the whole passage this way and says, but encourage one another daily, as long as it's called today, so that none of you, look at this, may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. Now, this phrase is really interesting to me because basically the author in this moment personifies sin. He makes sin like an entity. He gives sin almost like a voice, which for me is experientially true. I mean, this is how I experience sin, and I would imagine you experience this the same way. And what he does is he basically personifies it to go, hey, I'm trying to make my marriage better. I'm trying to make my relationship with my kids better. I'm trying to make my relationship with my mom and dad better, my best friends better. I'm trying to get healthy, whatever it is. Anything we're trying to do. And it's almost like in the midst of that, there's the pull, and the pull has a voice. And the pull will say things like this, hey, you've been good for 10 days in a row. Just this one day to be bad, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. So you're going to do one bad thing that's ultimately going to hurt you and the people around you because you've been good for 10 days? But that's the voice of sin. The voice of sin says, you know what? If she would just change, you'd be happy. If he would just change, you'd be happy. It's her fault. It's his fault. It's her fault. It's his fault. The voice of sin says, hey, it's no big deal. It's just physical. It's no big deal. It's just everybody just being happy. It's no big deal. The author says, man, when you're trying to make things better, the voice of sin is right there with you. And it can lead you to walk away from the living God. And here's the wildest thing. You've seen this. I mean, we could sit down and have coffee together, and you could tell me probably 10 stories. You could say, yeah, I mean, I've seen it. Let me tell you the story of my brother. Let me tell you the story of my brother-in-law. Let me tell you the story of one of my best friends. I mean, I could see it so clearly on the other side of them. I could see where their marriage was going. I could see where that dating relationship was going. I could see where those moral choices and those, addictions were going. I could see this with my son. I could see this with my daughter. I could see this with my best friend. It is so clear to see on the other side of you what's happening in that person's life. And in our culture today, we probably wouldn't call it sin. We would just call it, deception. They're just self-deceived. But do you know the best way to not be self-deceived is not to do life by yourself? And here's the other thing that you just got to kind of think about. Did you know, as crystal clear as it is for us to see on the other side of us, like, oh, look at their life and look at what's going on in the direction of their marriage, and no, that's not going to be good. It's so clear to us. Did you know somebody has that vantage point and it's that crystal clear to them about your life, about your marriage, about your moral choices? It's crystal clear. And the question becomes, are you going to benefit from that or not? Are you going to benefit from that and lean into that, even though it's irritating, or not? I mean, you can say what I hear, what I'm tempted to say, and what I have said, and what a lot of us are tempted to say is, I don't need anybody. Just fine. My marriage is fine. I'm fine. I got control of that thing. Just leave me alone. But perhaps we need somebody in our life that can look at us and ask us this question in the midst of that voice and say, I hear what you're saying, but whose voice is that? Because that certainly doesn't sound like the voice of your wife. That certainly doesn't sound like the voice of your kids. And that certainly doesn't sound like the voice of our Heavenly Father. And that kind of voice, that sounds like the voice of pride. And pride is a sin. And pride ultimately will harden your heart. The question is, are you going to benefit from that or not? Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is convictions and commitments, yes, they're part of it, but they're simply not enough. The something else is we've got to be connected. Connected is what leads to that freedom. Connected is what leads to us having the best chance at something better. And guys, I've experienced this in my own life. I mean, I've got relationships, and I've been in groups and with one another's, and those have done enough life to where, develop some trust with these individuals. And in fact, just a few months ago, I had one of these guys, I was talking to, and Jill and I were we were stuck in our marriage and stuck in this space, and we just kept going and over and over and over. And this guy stood there with me. He put his hands on my shoulders. And this is one of those one another moments. And he encouraged me, and he just said, Buck, you've got to stop all the blame stuff. You keep bringing up the past and you keep blaming her, and you are stuck, and you will not move forward until you stop with that. So would you trust me and bring that to me for the next 30 days and not bring it to Jill one time? And in the moment, I wanted to push back on that. Be like, no, well, you just don't understand. And yeah. And it was irritating. But guess what? It made things better. I mean, a few years ago, I sat with a group of guys that one another's. And they were talking about a habit of mine. And they were like, Buck, I know your future hopes and dreams. And this habit is becoming a little bit more And so can we talk about that? Can we have that conversation? Guess what I wanted to say? No, I'm fine. You're making it a big deal. It's not a big deal. But I sat there and I listened because I knew we developed enough trust. We've done enough life together. And they were spot on. And it made things better. You see, convictions, they're part of it. Commitments, they're part of it. But we've got to be connected. Because when we decide to take a step in and be connected, that's when it allows us to experience things perhaps in our life we've never experienced before. We've never tasted before. It allows us to feel more alive in the way that God designed you and me than we've ever experienced before. But we've got to make that choice and be connected. In fact, in the words of the author of Hebrews, he says, as long as it's called today, seize the moment. Take that step. Trust your Heavenly Father. Get connected with someone another's. So today, I want to give you that opportunity. I mean, one of the things we say here at North Point all the time, if you've come here for a while, is we say circles are better than rows. Circles are better than rows. I love rows, but rows, honestly, let's think about this. They're about convictions and commitments. Okay, here's a new idea. Man, I feel this. I'm committed to do this. Well, then what do you do when you leave? Well, that's where connection is so important because connection is where things actually get better. And so we say circles are better than rows because we know groups, community, one another is such a big part of growth and making things better. So today what I want to do is I want to give you an opportunity to take that step in, a step of trust towards being connected. So I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different than I usually do. I'm going to ask you to get your phones out. And once you get your phones out, I want you to text this number right up here. And so I want you to text 77222, and I want you to text groups 2020 to 77222. And here's what you're doing. You're just basically saying, hey, I'm interested in taking a step to get connected. And so after you text this, you're going to get a link, and I want you to click on that link, and I'll walk you through that form and what it looks like to take a step to get connected. So I'll give you about 30, 45 seconds. Get your phones out, text this number if you would, and then we'll talk through about how to get connected. Is it working? You getting the response and the link back? All right, so maybe 10 more seconds, and then I'll walk you through this. All right, you guys ready? Here we go. Now, listen real quick. I know that a lot of you guys are already connected. You're in a small group. You're part of a community. I totally get that. So this is, if you're signing up for a new group, this would be a perfect thing to do. But if you're already connected, I totally get that. And you know you've experienced what I'm talking about today. So for the rest of us, here's the deal. When you get this link, here's what's going to come up, is this form, and this is basically just general contact information. And here's what's really important. This is not to spam you. This is not to stalk you down. This is simply you just going, hey, I'm interested in being connected. I'm really curious about this, and I'd like some more information. That's all this is, and the reason why we ask for your address and all that kind of information is because we want to make sure and connect you with someone and others in that specific geographic area that you're at. So this just helps us reply to you and give some tangible steps of what it looks like to be connected. So that's this. So if you would fill this out, and then as you scroll down, you're going to see this. Two different kind of groups. There's going to be community groups, so the next page. There's community groups, and then there's short-term groups. So that's our kind of opportunities to get connected. And let me explain these two things really quickly. So a community group, think of that as more of a long-term group. That's committing to say, hey, I'm going to be with these one another's from 12 to 24 months. And I know that kind of commitment is like, wow, that's a lot. It takes time to do enough life together. It takes time to form trust. So that's a community group. We've got men's, women's, and couples. And the other thing I know about this long-term commitment is that oftentimes you're like, whoa, this is a little bit nerve-wracking. What if I don't like the people? And so just so you know, there is a 4 to 6 week period at the very beginning of your community group that we call the dating period. And if you don't like the people, or maybe there's not a good connection or chemistry, we totally get that. That's life. And just let us know during that dating period, and we will find a group of your people. So that is a community group. Make sure there's different nights if you want to select a couple nights that work for you. It's a great step of connection. The other part is short-term groups. Now, these groups are anywhere between 8 to 10 weeks, and these are great groups. The first one is Starting Point. Shane just talked about that a few moments ago. Starting Point happens on Sunday morning. It's the greatest place and the safest place in the world to ask your honest, historical, scientific questions. That is a great, great small group. In addition to that, we have Marriage Matters. That's a great group. If you're going, I just want to discover how to take my marriage further, we're stuck, whatever it may be, that's a great, great next step to get connected. And then I love this. We've got a brand new group called Momentum. Momentum is specifically for single moms. That group continues to grow, and there are distinctives in terms of your questions, tensions, struggles as a single mom, and we want to come alongside of you and create some connection with single moms to encourage one another daily about the small things and about the big things. That's a great next step. And last of all is Pathfinders. Pathfinders is a fantastic group for parents of special needs children. And again, very similar to single moms, there are distinctives. There are things you struggle with. There are tensions you have that are so unique to you. And to have a group of parents that you can talk about that with and find the me toos and go, yeah, I've struggled with that, and discover, what do we do? How do we lead well? It's a fantastic next step to be connected. And then the last page is this. It just talks about, hey, I can open my home for that. I'd love for that small group, the one and others, to meet in my home, or I'm interested in leading. So if you would fill this out, what'll happen next is that within the next week, we will send you some information about next steps, how to get connected, the logistics, the times, all that good stuff. That'll happen within a week. And today, if you still have additional questions, in our foyer, we're going to have a table that's set up for groups. Make sure to ask all your group questions. The bottom line of today, this is so important. I hope we never lose sight of this for the rest of our lives. Convictions and commitments, I get it. We get it. It's part of it. But we've got to be connected to experience something better in life. Let me pray for us. If you would fill that form out, that would be fantastic. Father, thank you for today. Thank you that you love us, that you are 100% for us. And we know that because of your Son, Jesus Christ. Father, today just talking about community, talking about one another's connected, you know where we're all at. You know our pushback to this. You know our experiences with this. So Father, would you just bring encouragement and wisdom and trust to take a step and get connected? I trust you with that. Thanks so much for today. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys for being here. I'll see you next week.